We had an immediate replacement, and all I had to do was ask, and it was like he volunteered. I'm going to introduce to you George Spohr, who is the news director of the Lafayette Journal and Courier. For those of you who get your information either from the newspaper, from the television, increasingly from social media, we all know that having a vibrant local news source, a responsible and attentive local news source, and one that is trustworthy is part of how the social fabric of our community stays strong, stays cohesive, and stays well informed. It is no understatement to say that in the Bill of Rights, the 10 amendments that were added to the Constitution, that the freedom of the press and the ability of us to be fully informed outside of government sources through an independent, trustworthy source of information is one of the foundations for an informed and responsible public citizenry. So I happen to have some passion for this. I was a reporter briefly before I ruined my life and went to law school. But working with people who are dedicated and committed to trying to find the best stories, good or bad, in our community is a special calling, and it's a special responsibility. So with the changes in newspaper publishing, there are increasing challenges to be relevant in the community, to be profitable, and to respond to subscribers' concerns. So it is with a great deal of humility and sincere appreciation that I'm going to let George Spohr introduce himself. This is the news director of the Lafayette Journal and Courier.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this opportunity. A special thank you to you, Stephen, for the invitation. Didn't realize I was a stand-in, but I'll try to do a good job today for you. And thank all of you for your service in Kiwanis. I started working for the Journal and Courier's sister newspaper in Utica, New York, when I was 17 years old. I'd always loved newspapers, and I used to produce my own newspaper on a Smith Corona typewriter with carbon copy paper and distribute it to the neighborhood when I was 8 years old. So yeah, I was one of the cool kids, definitely. Why are you laughing? What I loved working, first background is that the Journal and Courier and the paper that I worked for in Utica are both owned by a company called Gannett. What I loved about working for Gannett was that it was really the only newspaper company that was obsessed with reader surveys. They just spent so much money and so much time poring over reader data to make sure that the content the newsrooms were producing matched what readers actually wanted to know and needed to know. And that's different from a lot of other media companies that were pretty much obsessed only with the next Pulitzer Prize. Not that Gannett hasn't won its fair share of Pulitzers. I share those thoughts because I think the JNC may have lost its way over the past 2 years. Some background, the recruitment process for my job as the top editor of the JNC was about a 3-month process. During that time, late last year, I read the paper every day on the e-edition. I read jconline.com. And the reason I read it every day was because if I got this job, I wanted to make sure I hit the ground running on day one. I was struck by the number of indie star stories that we had in our newspaper. I see you guys agree with that assessment. I got the job in January and I moved here in February during an ice storm. That was fun. And I quickly learned that our reporters were busy chasing Pulitzers. They were working, all of them, on these long-term projects. Meanwhile, we were having our lunch handed to us by the competition when it came to covering news in Greater Lafayette. It quickly became my obsession to fix that. I challenged our editors and our reporters to do a better job finding a balance between special reports and covering the news every day. During one of my first hands-on newsroom meetings, I wrote the number 5 on a whiteboard, and I told the newsroom that is the minimum number of local stories we can have in our paper every day. That's enough to cover the front page with 2 stories, and then 3 stories on our local and state front on page 3. I'm immensely proud of the fact that with only 3 exceptions since I started back in mid to late February, there have been only 3 days where we've had Indy Star stories on our front page or page 3, unless it was for a valid news reason. And don't get me wrong, long-term projects and investigative pieces are a core component of what we do. But it can't be all that we do. And that's why I'm so immensely proud of how well my team is doing in covering Greater Lafayette. Our section is now filled with local content about local stories emanating here, not from Indy. In the past, we had run Indy Star stories, quite frankly, because we didn't have enough local content. We had to get the paper out every day. It was a really bad dynamic that we had created for ourselves. 2 weeks ago, we conducted a readership survey. Some of you may have taken it. We asked our readers what they like and what they don't like about the JNC. And we had over 700 people respond, which is just wonderful. And one of the most common themes that we heard was that there's not enough local news in the paper. And my first reaction to that, having worked so hard the last 4 months to combat that, was how have our readers not noticed how we've changed things? Then I calmed down and I realized it would take more than a few months to make sure that reality became perception. Before I started, it wasn't uncommon for the JNC to have only 1 or 2 stories from Greater Lafayette in our news section. Today we have 7. If you include the arts cover, we have 8. If you include the sports section, we have 12. And I promise you, I did not poison the well yesterday with my news team. I did not tell them I was coming here to speak to you. That is the natural process. Our newsroom, on its own, without my heavy hand, produced 12 stories from Greater Lafayette in today's newspaper. So if there's one takeaway I'd like for you to glean from my being here today, it's this. If you'd given up on us, or if you decided that our local journalism isn't worth $1.50 every day, I'd ask you to pick up a copy of today's paper and give us a second chance. My team has worked very hard to fight the perception that we've stopped covering local news. And on that very self-serving plug, I want to thank you again for letting me be here, and I want to hear your thoughts on the JNC, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
A lot of times, I read the Journal Courier mostly on Sundays.
Okay.
And, but I do follow you online. And a lot of times you start off with a story. I would like to, and you're not the only one doing this, okay? But we never get a follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
We never get a follow-up of the, who died, it's coming soon,
Sure.
Things like that. And so I would like to maybe have you think about a section of just follow-up on stories with little tidbits that, we are interested in our community, but it's kind of disappointing. Update coming soon, we will keep you posted, and then we never know.
Sure. Great question, asking why there aren't always follow-ups to stories in our paper. A good idea might be for us to have like a week in review type section in the Sunday paper.
Yes.
I might steal your idea and take full credit for it.
Awesome. I have an open house August 25th. I'd really love you to come.
Okay, appreciate
Home
it.
Care by Design, right across the street.
Okay. The issue of follow-up is twofold. So sometimes it's our fault. So sometimes we just drop the ball. We have a lot of, we've gone on a hiring spree in the last few months. We've really increased the size of our newsroom. We've added reporters. We're really trying hard again to cover Greater Lafayette the way it's supposed to be covered. What we have, though, with a bunch of new reporters is a lot of inexperience. And so they're learning on the job as they're doing the job. And I think one of the most difficult challenges as an editor is to coach reporters to make sure that we are following up. We absolutely can do a better job. The other part of the puzzle, though, is that, the other part of the equation, rather, is that we're beholden to our sources sometimes for follow-up. So there was that terrible story about the kid who was driving very quickly down a road, and it looks like he was on his phone at the time. We've been asking every day for a follow-up from the police on that, and we have been told every day to call the next day. There are a lot of police sources here that are very helpful to the media. I would say West Lafayette Police Department is one of the most media-friendly police departments I've had the pleasure of working with. Others are not quite so forthcoming, so it's a daily grind. And again, because we're beholden to others to get information, to give it to you, It's amazing how adept some of our police sources are at telling us to go away. We keep trying though. And again, the weekend review
Post that,
thing.
because I would like to,
Yeah.
we've tried to follow up on this, we're thinking
It's a great
about
idea.
follow up, but we have, our sources have.
I'm not above publicly shaming police officers who talk to us. That's a great idea. Thank you.
You don't have to say the police officer.
We won't name names.
Or the coroner.
Yes.
Could you describe the relationship between the paper and the online edition?
Absolutely. Great question. So the question is, what is the relationship between the Journal and Courier and jconline.com? We have one newsroom that produces content for all of our products, which also includes Lafayette Magazine. And we don't think about where the content is going. We just think about telling great stories from Greater Lafayette. We have a production team that is in charge of taking that content from our reporters, and we have one team that's in charge of putting out the paper every night, and we have one team that takes that same content and puts it on our digital platforms like your cell phone, for example. So one of the benefits for working at a large company like Gannett is they've really perfected the process of getting newsrooms out of the production business. It used to be that newsrooms had to take care of everything from writing stories to editing stories to designing the page to publishing the website. Now we have very specialized teams that do that. So all my team and I are super focused on is making sure that we are covering this community to the best of our ability, and then we let the production folks take content from that shared well and put it wherever it needs to go. I will say that this area is wonderful for a number of reasons. First of all, I've lived in 5 states. This is by far the most welcoming community I've ever lived in. Folks here are so friendly. I am so happy being Greater Lafayette. I can't express enough how warm and welcoming people here have been to me. And I'm from New York City, so I'm used to abrasive people. This is wonderful. The Midwest is great. But what I would say is the other thing that's great is this is a very strong market for print newspapers. So I think there's always a fear when a new editor comes on board, they're going to try changing everything, and obviously the industry's changing, and there will be a day when there isn't a daily newspaper. My job, as I see it, is to make sure that day is as far away as possible. Again, I love newspapers since I was a little kid. So if market forces force us to change publication frequency, so be it, but I will fight that kicking and screaming to the best of my ability. This market, so Gannett owns 109 newspapers across the country. Lafayette is actually #1 among the 109 newspapers for retaining and growing print newspaper subscribers. So I think some of you are subscribers. I thank you for that. You're keeping my newsroom and I gainfully employed. Yes?
I appreciate the Bob Creel research histories of Lafayette and the people who live here. Just knowing Bob about the research that he did and the information that really gives us the history way back in the early 1900s.
Bob Creel, his legacy, I never had the opportunity to meet him, but his legacy is so strong in our newsroom. His daughter, Carol Bangert, I hired as we call it content strategist. We have these new ridiculous titles, news director instead of editor, content strategist instead of managing editor. She's my #2, and she upholds her father's principles like no other. Running his columns in the paper and on our website is a priority for us. And I will say that one of the initiatives I really am focused on moving ahead in the next few months is getting some of that historical archive content back in the paper. There's such a voracious appetite for local history, and one of the biggest advantages that we have as the Journal and Courier is we have a 100+ year archive of Tippecanoe County history. So our ability to take that history and repurpose it or republish it in a way that pleases our readers is one of the, I'd say, top 2 priorities moving forward in the next few months. Yes?
Comment that we sure appreciate Dave Banker. That's the first thing I look for in the paper. And also on vacation, we quite often read the Traverse City paper. It's a small city paper, and they have, every day they have guest editorials syndicated or reprinted from smaller papers I'd like to see more of that in the Journal and Courier.
One of the things we're looking at, because you had mentioned that you want to see more opinions in the paper, more diversity of opinions, right? We have a USA Today section in the paper, and it's interesting. The readership study, we thought everyone was going to hate that USA Today section. I was stunned by the number of people who love that section. We actually, truth be told, were thinking about getting rid of it. But people love that section. That said, it's still 6 full pages a day. And one of the things that we're thinking about doing is bringing it down to, say, 4 pages a day, and then having a larger opinion section run behind that. So that might be an opportunity for us. I can't promise it's going to happen. There's a lot of corporate layers to work through there. But I think it might be a good compromise of our space. Great question. Yes?
One of my favorites is letters to the editor. Do you not print a lot of them that you get?
So the question was, do we not print a lot of the letters to the editor that we get? I would say we print the vast majority. The only times we'll reject a letter to the editor is if there is profanity that we can't edit out, or the letter writer has gone so far over the word count that we can't in good conscience cut it down and still make sure we've maintained their voice, in which case we'll kick it back to the letter writer and ask them to give it a second try. Unless it's extremely inflammatory, we're going to pretty much run any letter. I think just yesterday we had a letter criticizing us. We run every letter that we can. The letters to the editor section has diminished in recent years simply because a lot of that commentary on our journalism has now moved online. We haven't requested that it go online, quite frankly. I can't stand anonymous comments online. It's been the bane of my journalistic existence the last 10 years. But letters to the editor are still an important part of the paper, and if anyone who wants to write one, as long as you don't drop too many F-bombs on us, we will be happy to print them. Great question.
Another comment. Could you bring John Norberg back to the Sunday paper?
Great question. I will talk to Dave Bengard, who runs the opinions page, and gauge his interest in that. I don't want to step on his toes because it is his baby. Yes, sir.
What newspapers do you read?
Great question. So I read my hometown paper that I started working at, which is the Observer-Dispatch in Utica. Being a New Yorker, I read the New York Times every day. I read the JNC, of course. I read the Indy Star, and I read USA Today. I'm a good Gannett fanboy for my company. I'm a voracious newspaper reader. I would say I spend more time reading both print and digital newspapers than probably most of you, if I had to guess, which I would imagine is the case because it's my job. But I get the New York Times home delivered, I get the JNC home delivered, get the Indy Star home delivered. I love print newspapers, and despite my being 35, I'm not looking to get rid of them. Yes?
I don't know if you're too new to the community to know this, but do you know what has happened or what is going to happen to your old buildings downtown?
Yeah, I do know. We sold that building right before we moved. We moved, I want to say, 3 months ago. An out-of-state developer bought it. They are in the process of putting office and retail space on the first floor, and they've already started work on the second, third, and fourth floors to make them either condos or lofts. I'm not sure.
Of the old
what it is.
building?
Yep. So that building is a great example of adaptive reuse, and our old downtown building will have some new life in it, which is great. I, for one, probably because I'm so new, have no nostalgia toward our old building. My first day in that building was during my job interview. They flew me in from New York for the job interview. And I was all excited because I was happy to return to Gannett because Gannett, more than any other company, has really turned this digital corner better than any other media company has. And I wanted to see what this 21st century newsroom looked like. I want to see, anyone who's been in this newsroom knows where I'm going with this story. But for a newsroom that can produce virtual reality and live video, I wanted to know, what did a 21st century newsroom look like? So I go into that building, walk upstairs. The place hadn't been updated since probably the 60s from a decor standpoint. There are no windows. The newsroom is literally in the middle of the building. You couldn't tell if it's sunny, snowing, or raining. And it was a very cold January day. there were space heaters all over the floor with this patchwork of extension cords. I remember looking over at Jeff Taylor, who's the editor of the Indy Star, and he's my boss. I remember kind of looking at him and thinking, this is what a Gannett newsroom looks like in 2016, huh? That building had really lost its usefulness to us. I'm really happy it's getting new life. Our new building, if you haven't been there yet, we're having an open house next month. August, I think, 17th or 19th, whatever that Wednesday is. I'll get more details over to you guys so you can visit us. Our new home is beautiful. It has the best technology, the best furniture, the best color palette. It's a really great place to work, and I'm glad I got to experience the old newsroom for about a month, but I'm really happy to experience the new newsroom even more. Yes?
I'm a subscriber to the printed edition of the Journal.
Thank you.
When I pay my bill each month, it goes to something called Indiana Newspapers, Inc.
Okay.
What exactly is that?
I don't know exactly what that is. My guess is it's probably some kind of holding company for the distribution arm. So Gannett owns not just the Journal and Courier and the Indy Star, but also newspapers in Muncie, Richmond, and now Evansville. My guess is they've probably consolidated some of the back office billing stuff. One of the things Gannett has done, the question there was, who is this Indiana News Company Incorporated? One of the things that Gannett has done is they've taken all of the stuff that has nothing to do with news and sales, so all the production stuff, all the delivery stuff, and they've done a really good job of centralizing it in a way where that no longer hurts our bottom line. So now, more of our money is going to news gathering resources than it is having separate billing departments in each of the Indiana newspapers. We still have billing folks here. We have a couple of people in finance that do work in Lafayette. But all the back office stuff where every newspaper used to have its own, they've consolidated that in a really smart way, in a way that protects journalists' jobs, quite frankly. So, in the past I was always very, I don't say fearful, but apprehensive maybe, when I watched some of the back office stuff leave, say, Lafayette or other newspapers I worked at. I've come to appreciate that, though. I mean, it's no secret that print newspapers are going a very slow, painful way away. I don't want it to be the case, it just is. And as we turn that corner digitally, we make less money doing digital news than we do print news. It's just a fact of life. So we had to get smarter, we had to get leaner in order to protect the newsroom, which Gannett's done a really good job of doing. We've got a very strong number of reporters and a very good number of editors producing our daily report every day. Yes?
I'm a subscriber for the weekend and mostly digital.
Okay.
We get the weekend paper because the digital, my wife doesn't get the ads.
Oh,
yes.
yes.
Digital. And, she doesn't know who's having a sale, what, like.
That's how we trick you. You have to buy our Sunday paper. I mean, I'll be honest, I would love to stand up here as a journalist and say, I know you're all buying the Journal and Courier for our great journalism, but I also know that a lot of you buy our Sunday newspaper for the circular and the ads. And let's be honest, no one's buying the Thanksgiving Day paper for our stories. You're buying it for the inserts. So as long as you're buying it, I appreciate it. Yes?
So much of the news, when we open a typical edition, seems to be related to drug dealers, buggings, meth labs being busted, and so on, that I get so depressed I can't find anything positive that's happening in the community. How do you solicit input on the good things that are happening here?
That is a great question. So the question was, how do we strike a balance between the meth lab stories and the good news stories? Every day we talk about what we're going to put on our front page. It's a 3 o'clock, 2:30 meeting that we have 5 days a week. And one of the pieces of conversation that we have is, are we striking the right balance between good stories and bad stories? It's important that we tell the bad stories. If we were just a cheerleader for our community, I think we'd lose credibility very quickly, because there are problems in Lafayette. There are problems everywhere. And I think part of our job that we don't like so much is that we have to tell those stories. But I think all in all, more than perhaps any other paper I've worked for, the JNC does a pretty decent job of covering the good stories too. We've had a lot of what some of my harder news editors might call fluff pieces on our front page. We had a adorable little kitten on our front page just last week. We had a series of stories looking at, some positive business stories like how the airport is growing, how Rolls-Royce is growing. I think it's easy to look at the hard news and think that's all we have. But I would ask that you maybe take a second look and look at what we're trying to do. Every day we try to strike that balance between good news and bad news. Sometimes we do a better job than others. There are days when it's just a really hard news day, and you're right, it's just robberies and gunplay and meth labs. I will just point out that our sister paper is in Muncie, which has a lot more meth problems than we do. Their front page is horrific. I don't know who would want to live in Muncie. I mean, if you read that paper and you look at that, what they're covering, it's kind of like, I've never been there, so I shouldn't be that derogatory, but looking at what they put on their front page every day, it's depressing. I would like to think that the JNC doesn't quite depress everyone that much every day. Last question. Yes.
I really appreciate the boy that delivers the paper. He's there every day, right on time. Now my problem is, I've heard by the grapevine that you deliver the papers to these multiple locations. You deliver it, leave it in the area, and this is some of the best places in town, yet that young man has to pay for those who don't get it because somebody took it, it wasn't delivered to the door. Is that true?
I don't know. I'm not trying to pass the buck. I'm in the newsroom. The delivery operation is at our press plant. We're not even in the same building. I'm not trying to deny something. I just don't know the answer to that. The delivery folks are a different part of our operation at our press plant just down the road from us. I don't know the inner workings of that system, honestly. I'm sorry. I wish I did.
Could we get an address on that, or would you be able to give him an address that he could maybe write about it
Sure.
or something?
Absolutely. I'll work with
Yeah,
Stephen.
thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. I really appreciate it.
George has to step out and go to another meeting. I want to present George with our organizer, the Lafayette Kiwanis Club, celebrating 100 years of service to our community.
Thank you
And
so much.
George is going to let me know when the Journal and Courier open house is.
Yep.
And I'll be sure and let you all know because we'll all be invited and you can think about any other questions you have and come talk to him then. Thank you, George.
Thank you so much.
George, I have one question.
Sure.
We do lots of good stuff in this room, but many times that news doesn't get out of this room.
Okay.
So is there any way we can kind of like release the note or press release to you and you can think about it?
Absolutely. I mean, anyone in this room, feel free to contact me anytime. And I can't make promises because we have a lot of great organizations in our area doing great work.
Mm-hmm.
I will at least respond and let you know what we can do or not do. Fair
That's
enough?
great. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.